Today's Monday, the 28th of November. And this is history class. Your homework is posted on Facts. First of two lessons about the American Civil War. Note cards. Make sure you get your test signed. Okay, so we're going to start today with two prayers. And one of them is from the Confederate side and one is from the Union side. So why don't you close the door, David, actually. I'm reading you a prayer from both sides because I think a great way to start the study of the Civil War is to think about what does it mean for a country to fight against itself. That means that there are people from the same country who in a lot of ways share values, who are fighting each other for very complex reasons, and also mostly they're all Christians. So that means obviously in this life-threatening situation, they're all praying. So they're praying to God to give them victory over other Christians who are praying to God to give them victory over them. People are praying opposite of each other. In a very silly way, it's like going to a sporting event where you really, really, really want to win, and so you're praying ahead of time. And you might pray, God help me do my best, but you might actually be praying, God help me win. These prayers, you'll see when I read you these prayers, there's a lot in here that reflects the fact that they felt like, on both sides, that they were right. And they were praying that God would defend them in their rightness, even though they are on completely opposite sides of each other in this rightness. So let me start with this particular prayer. Do you guys know which side this one's from by looking at the picture? What do you think? No, here's the other one. That's the Union soldier. This one is the Confederate soldier. This came from a book that's published book about prayers for Confederate soldiers. And the other one was a prayer that was turned into a bit of a hymn or a song. So you'll see the other one rhymes, the Union one. So let me start by reading you the Confederate one. And I want you to look in particular for the ways in which they are not just asking God to help them, we'll say survive, but actually asking God to help them win, and the way that they pray about what is right. All right. O most powerful and glorious Lord God, the Lord of hosts, that rules and commands all things, thou sittest in the throne judging right, and therefore we make our address to thy divine majesty. In this, our necessity, that thou wouldst take the cause into thine own hand and judge between us and our enemies. Stir up thy strength, O Lord, and come and help us. For thou givest not always the battle to the strong, but canst save by many or by few. O let not our sins now cry against us for vengeance, but hear us thy poor servants begging mercy and imploring thy help, that thou wouldst be a defense unto us against the face of the enemy. Make it appear that thou art our Savior and mighty deliverer, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, this one, which was used as a prayer, used as a hymn, is even more explicit in how it claims being on the side of right and how it asks God for help. Almighty God, eternal friend, before thy sacred throne we bend and ask in supplications low, thy blessing on our cause bestow. Thy strength unto our hosts now send, and wisdom to our counsels lend. O, aid our country and its laws, for thine and freedom's sacred cause. God of our fathers, hear the cry which now ascends to thee on high. A bleeding nation calls on thee to shield the birthright of the free. Unto thy great decrees we bow. Thy strength alone can aid us now. Hear our prayer, O Lord divine. Be victory ours and glory thine. O Lord of hosts, supreme in might, stretch forth thine arm, defend the right. Hurl treason from its brazen throne. Let truth and justice reign alone. As Israel passed through the sea, in safety, guided, Lord, by thee, so lead us through the tide of war, and thine be praise forevermore. Anybody have any observations of anything you saw in those prayers? Anything you noticed in them? Anybody notice where it's sort of claiming? Yes. Yes. Where do you see that in the prayer? What line? They called this sacred cause. And they also said, victory is ours, glory is thine. So very much has that. But then you see it a little bit in the other one too, don't you? Don't you as well? God is the judge, but in judging what's right, it's judging our cause to be right. So very interesting. Now we're gonna step away from the Civil War for a minute. We're gonna come back to it. We're gonna stop here because we're gonna actually fill out a map, and this map is the next geography map. If you look on your syllabus, you'll see you have no assessments before Christmas except this map. So this is kind of, David, you can turn the lights on. This is sort of the big one. But it's a little bit more complicated because this is probably not an area of the world that you guys have traveled to or know very much about. Although I will ask, is there anybody here who's ever been to Asia? Where have you been?
Nepal, India, Malaysia, Laos, Thailand, Bangladesh.
Yes. That's awesome. She's the rare case of somebody for whom this map will make sense.
Lived there.
Yeah.
And my brother's wife.
That's fantastic. What about you, David? Okay. Austria, we'll get to that in the European map. Yeah. Okay, so since this map is marked with numbers, my recommendation is that you use numbers to mark it on. If you are following along at home, I'm pointing out the countries. You can also open up a Google Maps or something like that and use it to help you mark the countries. Or you can just listen to my descriptions, and that might help you. All right, so the first one, we're starting with the easy ones. Easy ones is that the large country closest to the North Pole is Russia. This very large country, put a number 1 there. You can write the word Russia if you want, but we're going to get to countries where it's going to be really hard to write the words into it. So you might want to just write the numbers. So that's Russia. Number 2, Mongolia is located in between Russia and China. It doesn't look that big on the map, not compared to Russia and China, but it's quite a large country. Yes. Yeah, but not the people, because up here it's very much less populated because it's so cold and intemperate. All right, number 1, number 2, Mongolia. Number 3, China. China is full of people. It's a very large country. You can kind of like let your eyes look at the boundaries of it. All of this is China, number 3. Now, number 4 and 5 used to be one country together. They are currently 2 countries. It's this peninsula that drops down off of the edge of China close to Japan, and it is North Korea and South Korea. North Korea 4, South Korea 5. North Korea is closest to China, touches China on a boundary. South Korea is closer to Japan. And North Korea is a communist country. South Korea is a capitalistic free country. Yeah. Next, Japan. Japan is this island country that looks like a crescent moon that is off the coast of Russia, Korea, and China. All of this is Japan. And then the last of the really easy to identify ones is India. India has a similar shape to Africa, the continent of Africa. Of course, it's smaller scale than that, but the shape always helps me pick it out and remember it. So this is number 7, India. All right, now we are going to get into the region. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wanted you to notice one thing about India before we go on. And this is going to help you with all the rest of them. India has a very strange geographical thing if you will look on the eastern side of India. So look right here at this point in India, and you're going to need to look on your own map. Do you see how there's a very skinny section of land that does not have any lines that cut off the boundary? Look on your map, you'll see it better. India goes through this land and then over to here. This is India as well. And it might help you to put like striped lines on all of that to notice which parts are India, because India is of course the large section, but it also has this little skinny section that goes off into this other part. That's going to help you make sure you don't mix up India with the other countries. And in just a minute, I'll show you a little video about why India has that very strange shape, which the video says is like a chicken neck. Skinny little neck of India, and then it goes into a bit of a head here. All right, so this region right here is the region of the world where the Himalayan mountains are. Y'all have heard of those, right? Yeah. So you know, we have very tall mountain peaks. It's not, there aren't a lot of people that live in these regions. And in fact, you'll see, do you see the dotted lines? You can see it better on your own map. But the dotted lines up at the top of India. The dotted lines mean that those borders are in dispute. Countries are arguing about who actually owns these. And it's a bunch of countries, including China, India, Afghanistan. They all sort of generally argue about it. But it's a mountainous region in where the Himalayas are. So it's not like there's a lot of people there. There aren't big cities there. It's just sort of has stayed in flux, not distinguished yet. But in this vein, you have number 8, Nepal. Nepal is this country that is in between India and China. So put an 8 there for Nepal. Nepal. Okay, that's number 8. Number 9, Bhutan, is on, like, you have to hop to right here. It's still surrounded, it's actually surrounded by India on 3 sides and then China on the northern edge. So this is Bhutan, the 9th, number 9. Y'all see where that is? Okay. Number 10, Bangladesh, is, so if you now know where India is, this is going to be a little bit easier to pick it out. But Bangladesh is here. Bangladesh is surrounded on almost every side by what? By India. All over the place, except for the part that's touching the water. It's just India, 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 everywhere India. And then here's Bangladesh right here, number 10. All right, number 11 is a country that has really interesting boundaries. It's Myanmar, otherwise called Burma. So to start off with, it's kind of easy. We're putting a number 11 in this larger fat place right here. Right here is number 11, Myanmar. So go ahead and put an 11 down, and then I want you to look on your map and try to follow the boundaries of Myanmar, of Burma, down, 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 down that peninsula. Do you see what's happening when you do that? Just keep going down with your eyes until you can figure out where the actual boundaries of Myanmar are. They're very, very interesting, very odd boundaries. By the way, every boundary line has a storyline. And it is true that a lot of times the storylines are kind of boring, like, hey, we split it on the river. Oh, it was a mountain and it made sense. But you've got to look at these and go, ooh, that's an interesting story. It's always an interesting story. So that's Myanmar, Burma, number 11. Number 12, Laos. I always think Laos looks a little bit like a kid's wand with a star on top. You see right here? Some people think it looks like a palm tree. But like a star on top, I think of a wand with a big fat handle right here. This is Laos. And that's number 12. All right, so if you have marked Burma or Myanmar and you've marked Laos, now right in the middle of it is Thailand. Thailand's number 13, and this is Thailand in between those two countries we just marked. Thailand has a little bit of a heart shape to it there on the top, but once you mark it as a 13, now I want you to follow its boundary lines down that peninsula. Look at what happens when you go down for Thailand. Another really interesting, really skinny edge to the boundary lines. And of course, these skinny parts of these countries are all following what? What does everybody want to have access to? Water. So they're all following these coastlines where you know that part of the story has got to be the debate over who's going to have access to water. All right, so Thailand goes down. It stops a little sooner than Myanmar does. All right, next one is Cambodia. All right, Cambodia is boringly simple. It's just right here in the middle of all these countries, no weird boundaries at all. Cambodia. And then number 15, Vietnam, is of course where the Vietnam War was. Vietnam is on the outside edge of this entire piece of land. It's a crescent-shaped country that on the northern edge touches China, and down here it just hangs into this Indochina Sea. So this is all Vietnam. When we talk about the Vietnam War, there'll be a lot of talk about the northern Vietnam and southern Vietnam, with northern Vietnam being more communist, which kind of makes sense because look, it touches China, which is a communist country. But the geography of these regions is super important to all the conflicts that happened. That is 15. 16, Malaysia. All right, so I'm going to point at Malaysia and then I'm going to ask you to look at something. Malaysia is, there's a line right here. Malaysia is this sort of chunk right here at the bottom of this peninsula that hung out. Number 16, Malaysia. Number 16, Malaysia, right here. Now, north of Malaysia is a country we've already talked about. Malaysia's border touches what country? What do you think? It's not Thailand. Nope. Look, follow down. You have to really trace the lines really carefully. Yeah. Do y'all see it? What is it? Yeah, it's Myanmar. So the right above Malaysia is Myanmar. From that really weird lines, it come all the way down from up here. It goes down, and it pops out right here. So this is Malaysia, number 16. All right, 17, you're practically going to have to draw this onto your map because it is like we'll say a city country. It's so tiny that you can't even see it on your map. Singapore. It's also very wealthy, very well known, sort of a capitalistic center of the world, and lots of American businessmen travel to Singapore. It is on the very tip of Malaysia. You'll have to literally draw a little ball there, make your own little black dot, and mark it as number 17, Singapore, right here on the tip. Your map has a tiny tip, like a tiny bit of that space, but you'll probably just have to make it a little bigger so you know. Yeah, Singapore. Singapore's a very clean city. Has anyone ever heard about Singapore and how clean it is? What have you heard, Reese? Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody else heard anything about Singapore? It's illegal to chew gum. When I say illegal, you can't litter. Like if you drop a piece of paper, you'll go to jail for several years for dropping paper. It's a very clean city. That's what everyone says about it. It's super clean. I don't know. Would you want to risk it with that hovering over your head? maybe you don't get caught.
They better have trash cans.
I'm sure they do.
That's true.
What you want to tell us? Oh, right. Nepal is a dirty. It's just messy here. Yeah. I know of Nepal because for a long time I still keep up with a leprosy, a group that treats leprosy there. Did y'all know that there's real leprosy still in the world today? And there's a lot in Nepal because it's viral, so it gets passed around, and it's also treatable. It's very treatable, but in their culture, a lot of people don't get treated, and when they don't get treated, then they really have trouble. Yeah. So it's a really good mission opportunity to just go and help treat things like leprosy. And a lot of it's education. It's telling them, hey, guess what? We can help you. Instead of just thinking like this is sort of a curse, a divine curse against you, you have leprosy. Like, no, it's a virus. We can treat it. But when people don't treat it, what leprosy does is it kills all the nerve endings on your body, so you can't feel things. And this is a culture that's poor, so they go barefoot. So if you're going to go walking through the fields barefoot, and the bottom of your feet don't have any nerve endings, you can't feel anything, what's going to happen to your feet? They'll work, but what did you say? They're going to get cut up just from like stepping on things. And normally, if you step on something, you would notice it, right? You'd be like, ah, and then you go and you put a Band-Aid on. But if you don't know that you got yourself cut, then you can get infected. Yeah, it gets worse. And so people end up having to get like their limbs amputated because they lost their feeling, and because they don't go and just get it treated. It's like to be like, oh, I'm not having a feeling, I need medicine. In a culture where it seems like, no, you that happened because you did something bad, which is very much like the Bible, right? In the Bible times, people who had leprosy had to go live outside the town in a certain tent, and partly to prevent the virus from spreading. If you want to sort of see like why would God make rules like that, but with medicine, it's very true. Like a quarantine island? That's fascinating. All right, last three, Indonesia. Okay, so Indonesia this is a little tricky on your map because your map cuts it off. Indonesia is right here. It's this island country, but it goes sort of, on either side of the bottom of your map. Indonesia. Number 19, the Philippines, is a group of islands. This was an American territory. Here, the Philippines right here. This whole thing is the Philippines. And last but not least, has anyone ever visited Taiwan? No, Taiwan? Yeah. So Taiwan is sort of like a Western-ish Chinese place. Anyway, it's an island right here. This is Taiwan. It's off the coast of China. All right, that's all 20 of them. The map is already posted on Google Classroom for you to do it. We don't have a super long time before the assessment, so do go ahead and study like when you have time to, because it's cool that way. All right, before we move on, why is India such a strange shape is the question. India is a strange shape because of political things.
Welcome to Mad Maps, Episode 2. Many countries' borders make sense. They follow rivers, mountain ranges, or coastlines. But some countries' borders don't seem to make any sense at all. This is Mad Maps, where we look at some of the world's strangest borders.
This is India. And this is India's Siliguri corridor, also known as the Chicken Neck. It is 22 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and it leads to another part of India over here. The 45 million people who live here could easily be cut off from the rest of the country. Some see this as a security threat, considering lingering tensions between India and China. So how did the chicken neck come to be? Well, all of this used to be the British Empire. In 1947, everything changed. India was about to gain its independence. But first, the new borders of the independent states had to be decided. The British had just a man for that, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a judge. There was just one problem. He had never been to India before. His task was to partition the region and mark where the new borders would be. And these are the results. The Muslim majority areas roughly became Pakistan, and Hindu majority areas roughly became India. So East and West Pakistan were actually this far apart before East Pakistan became independent Bangladesh. But this isn't just trivia. The consequences of the partition, as it's known, were dire. As everyone was trying to figure out which side of the tracks they needed to be on, the messy exit of the colonial power turned into a bloodbath.
But time and again came the tragic aftermath of yet another ferocious outbreak. Survivors seek a new hiding place before the next attack. Meanwhile, refugees in their thousands reached the already crowded areas of Old Delhi.
The conflict left more than 15 million people displaced and between 1 and 2 million dead.
That's just a really interesting thing, I think, about how the borders came about. They were, of course, related to politics, and a British person who had never been there, that was like, it made sense. He split it up in a way that made sense. All right, blank screen for those of you at home means print off or get out the handwritten notes called What Caused the American Civil War. We're going to do some notes first and then watch a video, which I will post the videos on Google Classroom because if we don't finish them, you can watch them yourself. There we go. All right, all the maps and stuff, the rest of the stuff can be put away. This is your last thing. So I'm going to leave this running, guys, just because I want the people at home to be able to hear. But we're starting with this right here. What caused the American Civil War? I want to first ask you if you can look at my handwritten notes and see something that looks wrong with them. Structurally wrong, we'll say, in the way that I did the outline. Does anybody see something wrong with my outlining form? Oh, we're on this one. What's wrong with the way that I did the outline? We're on the handwritten notes now. I asked what caused the American Civil War. I put number 1, and then what's missing? Well, of course the answer's missing. I'm going to tell you the answer. What's that? Number 2 is missing. Yeah, when you do an outline, you never put a 1 without a 2. That's just the way that outlines are done. It's called balancing out your points, right? Like when Miss Pilson tells you you need to have, a thesis with 3 points, or you just never have just one, unless it's just one argument that you're developing. Here, I on purpose put only 1 because I'm trying to make the point that there was one primary cause of the American Civil War. And everything else is different than that first and primary cause. So you guys probably know what this is. What was the primary cause of the American Civil War? Slavery. That's what you write in that blank there. The primary cause, all the historians agree about this. This is not a debated point. And this was something that people agree from looking at both sides of the war, writings from both sides. The primary cause was slavery. Now, having said that, a lot of people will say, well, no, on the South side, it was about states' rights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to concede that, but as a sub-point, point A underneath point 1. It says this: the Southern states' rights to keep and expand slavery. So states' rights, write states' rights in that blank. The states' rights, it's true, but the primary thing that the states at this point in history wanted to do was to keep slavery and to expand the slavery into different territories. And a lot of the fights that were going on politically at that time were about which states would be slaves, which states would be free, would the new states coming in be slave or free, can we come up with compromises, that sort of thing. So still the issue was primarily about slavery, even when people are talking about states' rights. Now, even though I'm telling you this, like this is sort of today undisputed fact, Lincoln himself at the beginning of the war did not say that he did not call the people in the North to fight because of slavery. That's not what he said. He told people, we are fighting this war because we need to preserve the what? The Union. Preserve the Union. That goes in that blank. So he said, this is about the United States. We have a country, it needs to stay together. Even though slavery was very much the driving force, it wasn't Lincoln's rhetoric at that time. Eventually it became part of his rhetoric. But at that time, he was saying, we got to fight, we can't let these states secede, we can't let them leave, we've got to preserve the Union. Now, other sort of causations that affected it were the fact that both sides talked about religion. This takes you back to the prayers that I started class with. Both sides said, God is on our side. Both sides. Everybody's Christian in this sort of framework. There's not any of the cultures that are fighting each other that are something different than Christian. So the North said this, it's God's plan to extend democracy and Christianity across the unbroken continent. Christianity is the word that goes in that blank there. So the North said, God's plan is to make a Christian nation in this continent. Do you all remember when we were talking about westward expansion and we were talking about the Native American issues there? Do you remember that I showed you a picture, and it was a picture of a woman with a very long gown on. She's like way bigger than the land. Sort of this giant woman. It's a famous painting or portrait. And there are like wagon trains down below. People are heading west. And she is the woman who represents what was called manifest destiny. Do you all remember this? Okay. So the idea of manifest destiny, like this is the destiny to take America from sea to shining sea, from coast to coast, to expand. Kind of like maybe there were natives there, it doesn't matter. Like this is our land, this is our destiny. We are expanding this country like this, and we're sort of like everybody's absorbed into that. That idea was manifest destiny, that it's God's plan, it's God's idea, that we are expanding like this. The North actually used that argument to say it's God's plan for all of this land to not be divided into two countries, but for all of us to be united and for it to all be one Christian nation. Okay. So the North is using God, Christianity, for their explanation. The South also says God is on our side. God is on our side. He is helping us to leave the Union because we are going to form a more, anybody know? A more blank union? That is true. The word, though, is something that shows up a lot in the language. A more perfect union. Yes, so the word there in that blank is perfect. So here you have the North saying God's plan is for us to all stay together and all be one Christian nation. And the South is saying, no. God's plan is that basically we don't like the way things are being done. We want a more perfect union. We want to form this more perfect union. And then to circle back to states' rights. It is true that states' rights were involved in the conflict. In fact, a lot of what the Southerners talked about is fighting against the tyranny of a big federal government. Federal is that blank. A big federal government. Now, I think most of you guys are going to recognize this if I say to you, do you remember from the Hamilton show that he was a Federalist? Are you guys familiar enough with Hamilton for me to say this? Do you remember that Hamilton and Jefferson were on different sides from each other? Jefferson wanted smaller government. Hamilton wanted a big federal government. That's why he wrote the Federalist Papers. He was arguing for a strong national bank, a strong central government, and this was an early America debate. Should there be a strong central government, or should the power stay in like localities, states, local sort of entities? Which way should the power go? Hamilton wanted it to be federal, like centralized, Washington D.C. The Thomas Jefferson and some of the others, the anti-federalists, did not want the power to be like that. They wanted it to be smaller, like small, big government, small central government, bigger, like, or stronger personal or local governments. This is why, if you tracked with the play, it was such a big deal when Hamilton actually endorsed Jefferson for president, because they had been enemies, political enemies, for a long time. But he just decided that he thought he was a better character and endorsed him for that reason. Okay, so that is the end of this section about the causes of the Civil War. I'm going to go to the second section unless anybody missed a blank. Okay. The second section, look at this. This is the North and the South, and what are kind of the strengths of each side, or the aims of each side. The North was also called the what? Union. So put Union underneath North. When people talk about the Civil War, the North is Union. The South was also called the Confederacy. So write Confederacy under South. So let's talk about what was kind of like the chances of things working out. The North had a lot more people, 22 million people compared to 9 million people. And when I say 9 million people in the South, 3.5 million of them were slaves. So it was a lot less than 9 million that were probably willingly fighting. So think about that. Stop and think about that for a minute. That's not really a very even, like, battle, is it? Next, the North had basically almost all the factories. Or another word for that is industry. Industry is the blank there. I'll say, as an example, cloth, shoes, and guns. Now, think about what it takes to fight a war. Let's say at an extended war, after a while, besides feeding people, you also need to give them clothes. And then when their shoes wear out, more shoes. And then it helps a lot in a war to have guns. And also iron was in the northern side, so they could make bullets. The South had a different problem. In the South, when their clothes wore thin, what did they do? They just wore thin clothes because they didn't have the capacity to, like, they had cotton, but they weren't produced. It wasn't being produced into cloth. Also in the South, the shoes. When their shoes wore out, what did they do? Barefoot, wrap their feet, whatever. When their guns wore out, they had to fix them or get a gun off somebody who died in the battlefield. They just didn't have, the army wasn't able to produce and give them new guns. So the South was really disadvantaged in terms of that sort of thing. Railroads. Railroads are all about transportation, being able to move things around. The North had 30,000 miles of railroads. The South, 10,000 miles of railroads. And also the North could grow needed food. They used their farmland for food. What did the South do with its farmland? What did they produce? Cotton and tobacco. Can you eat cotton and tobacco? Is that nutritious? David, would you mind shutting the door again? So the South had a problem with like being able to produce enough food to sustain an army. So when you look at all the things I just tell you, who does it seem like is going to win this war? North. And pretty quickly, right? Like, how do you even win a war if you don't have industry, you don't have food, you don't have transportation, you don't have guns? Like, okay, well, then why didn't the North just win the war really fast? Let's look at the other side, on the Confederacy. What were the things the South had sort of strengthening it? Well, one is secession. That's when they left the United States. When they left the United States, that made them say, we're fighting for our freedom. So there's this motivational force of freedom. Also, most of this, or very much of it, was fought in the South, which means, we talked about this in a previous time, but there was a home field advantage. Like, you know your own turf, you know the land, you know all of that. You're on your own home field. Probably the main thing the South had going for it, though, was that it had the very best officers. That's that plate, officers. I'll say everybody. It doesn't matter who the scholars are. They say that General Lee, Jeb Stuart, Stonewall Jackson, those were the best officers in the entire Civil War. Let's think about who did Lincoln start with? General McClellan. Not only did he fire him, but then General McClellan ran against him for president and would have pulled America out of the war and not won it. So McClellan was a bit of a mess, with Lincoln anyway. He also had Ulysses S. Grant, who eventually ended up, Grant and General Sherman ended up winning the war, but it took them years to start even winning battles. So it just took the North a long time to get their feet under them. The South did a much better job of defending and being aggressive because they had better officers. That's part of what extended the war. Finally, under here, the South said this is a defensive war. They're trying to come and make us be part of the Union. We'll just wait them out. Eventually, they'll leave us alone. That would be a really cool idea if it weren't for the fact that, like I told you before, they didn't have resources. It's really hard to wait people out when you don't have food, you don't have factories, you don't have transportation, so the South was under-resourced. The South thought, though, that England would join their side because England previously was buying 75% of their cotton from the South, the American South, and so the South was like, well, they need us, they're going to help us. But England didn't need them because when it became hard to buy cotton from the South, any idea where they went instead? Not America at all. Where's a completely different place that England could have gone to buy cotton? Nope, it wasn't South America. That was more Spanish colonies. Do you know where else? Any idea where else would produce cotton? What is it? Yeah. India or Egypt. India and Egypt. So, and those were places that England had basically colonies. So they just switched and bought it from there. So the South was really kind of abandoned by England. All right, last thing on the notes is this question. Did Lincoln free the slaves? Yes or no? Did Lincoln free the slaves? You're like, can I say yes? I mean, it's yes and no, right? Yes, because of the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, because he said the Emancipation Proclamation. But you guys understand, the Emancipation Proclamation only was aimed at the rebelling states. It only freed the slaves in the states that were rebelling, which Lincoln had no control over because they were rebelling. That's the whole point. So he freed the slaves in the rebelling colonies, and then there were border states that were slave states that stayed in the Union. He didn't free the slaves there. They were still allowed to keep slaves, and the fugitive slave laws were still in place. So under Lincoln, the slaves were, the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, but actually, practically, the slaves in the Union were not freed. So how they get freed? They freed themselves. slaves started running away. They started leaving the South. They started coming to the North and joining the military. And once a lot of slaves were coming and joining the military, the laws followed. Because then people recognized how important and how valuable these slaves were to winning the Northern cause. And that's when the other laws were passed that did ultimately free slaves. So, like, it's yes and no. Lincoln was elected because he was moderate. He wasn't an abolitionist. His wife was a Southerner. His wife's family fought for the South. He was a very complex person, and yet in that way, he was kind of the man for the job. All right, I'm going to show you a little bit of this video. Those of you at home, you can watch this otherwise on your own.